saddening news ahead of this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix, as it is announced that at the age of 76, former F1 team boss turned pundit Eddie Jordan has sadly passed away. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks for what will normally be our Chinese Grand Prix Media Day F1 update. We will get on to what happened during the Media Day a little bit later on, but Ian, we've got to start with Eddie and his saddening passing, a horrible way to start this Grand Prix week. And obviously many will refer to Eddie as EJ, which is what it feels like everyone seemed to know him as. And I mean, he announced, of course, last year that he was suffering from aggressive prostate and bladder cancer. Based on the sheer volume of the tributes which have come in across social media, it goes to show not only how loved EJ was, but most importantly, how dearly missed he is going to be.
He was one of F1's all-time greatest characters. I think it's fair to say, Nick. So many words you could associate with Eddie Jordan, of course. A character, flamboyant, one of a kind, unique. I had a chat with Bernie Ecclestone, the Formula One Supremo, of course, just before I came on air with yourself and to do this video. And he described him as a fighter, special, a man who could dig his way out of problems when he found himself in them. Many superlatives, not just from Bernie, of course, but from all across Formula One as to the kind of personality and character he was. And this is true, of course, because he was one of those guys that kind of not so much transcended the sport, but really epitomized the sport as to what it was all about during one of those eras when F1 was really trying to forge its way, trying to make a path for itself amongst many other sports. And, Bernie was in charge at that particular time. And Jordan Grand Prix was one of those teams that was fighting its way tooth and nail every single season just to stay on the grid. And now here we are in this remarkable era of Formula One in which every team is valued at $1 billion, it seems, and what Eddie Jordan would have given in his time to have a team that could have that kind of price tag attached to it, because, as I say, he was someone that fought tooth and nail for his team. Unfortunately, he had to sell it at the end of the day, and it's gone on through many different guises over the past 20 odd years, and of course it is now what we know as Aston Martin Formula One team. So Aston Martin is forged from the ashes of what effectively Eddie had built up and ultimately had to give up. But yes, one of those really sad days in Formula One. Yeah, of course, everybody here at Racing News 365 sends their condolences, of course, to Eddie's friends, family and colleagues. But bottom line is, what a character, and he will sorely be missed by many people who knew him so well.
And of course, you can find Ian's exclusive chat with Bernie over at Racing News 365. And there is one sentence I do want to read from that, which I thought was just absolutely brilliant. Because, of course, Bernie referred to EJ as a fighter, a true racer, but also said that he's the sort of guy who could get himself into all sorts of trouble and yet find his way out of it. He was special. And of course, it's easy to forget that obviously Eddie gave Michael Schumacher his
Yeah.
debut, and it was only a couple of weeks ago we were joined by David Coulthard on our podcast, who of course was very, very close with EJ, and we got to speak a little bit about Eddie. Bernie was absolutely brilliant, it's fair to say, on EJ.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I've always had a really good relationship, in fairness, with Bernie. I can always just pick up the phone and give him a buzz at any given time. And unfortunately, there has to be sad times when I do have to pick up the phone and speak to him. That's what you do as a journalist. You go chasing, the quotes and the stories at various stages. And this had to be one of those days. But Bernie, as always, really good. Said hi. He was in Switzerland, just let people know, but he will soon be heading across to Brazil to tend to the farm there. Sounded in reasonably good health himself. Of course, we know he's quite an age now. But yes, in good form at least. And thank you ever so much, Bernie, for your time and speaking so warmly and kindly about now the late, great Eddie Jordan.
And of course, you'd like to think nothing's been confirmed yet, but you'd like to think that F1 will hopefully do something of seeing Eddie's honour in
I'm sure
China
they will.
this weekend. I really hope so. Let's talk a little bit about Media Day, because of course the EJ news came really after all the drivers had said their words for
Yeah.
today. And I mean, another truly fascinating Media Day in Shanghai, which actually kind of kick-started before Media Day on Wednesday. And an interesting comment from McLaren CEO Zach Brown in an interview with The Telegraph. And I don't know if Zach's trying to ruffle a few feathers in the Red Bull camp at the moment,
Of
but
course he
Zach
is.
said that he predicts that Max Verstappen will leave Red Bull at the end of this year to join Mercedes. It's fair to say that, well, maybe Zach is playing a few mind games.
Yeah, of course he is, Nick. Of course he is. This is what the game's all about. Look, how often have we seen it in the most recent past? If you think of Toto Wolff and Christian Horner going head to head, Toto Wolff making a clear play for Max last season after, of course, Lewis had said that he was going to leave and go to Ferrari. And then, of course, we had all that, will Max leave? Won't he leave? Toto kind of the same making this play for him. And now we know that Zach Brown and Christian Horner, there's no love lost between those guys, just like there's never really been any love lost between Toto Wolff and Christian. And now, with McLaren really coming to the fore, having its opportunity in the spotlight, Zach Brown, who we know is prone to a really good quote or two, is deciding to make hay while the sun is shining on his team. Because obviously while it's behind, he couldn't quite be as punchy. Well, now he can. He can afford to be. He knows his team has got the best car this season, certainly on the evidence of what we've seen from one Grand Prix in Australia. But it's not just one Grand Prix in Australia. It was, of course, we saw that in pre-season testing. We kind of indicated that McLaren looked like it had a good car. So we can clearly see that there is an advantage. A lot of the drivers have been talking about the advantage of that McLaren as well, which I know we're going to come on to. So as I say, right now, Zach Brown can afford to have a little bit of a dig at Red Bull and Christian Horner and say, your guy's going soon, folks. You're not looking after him very well. Well, let's see what, of course, what comes into play, because we know what politics are like. We know it's all mind games and trying to get under other people's skin and rile them. Of course, Jos Verstappen has responded in kind and had a little bit of a say back, of
Yeah.
course, so kind of downplaying it quite a lot. He used a little bit of an expletive to do so, so I'm not going to repeat that in this video, but you can kind of imagine what Jos Verstappen felt about Zach Brown's comments. I'm sure Christian Horner's going to have his say at some point over the weekend as well, and I can't imagine he's best pleased, but it's all part of the game. Christian's well used to this by now.
It's interesting you mentioned there, though, that obviously, Zach knows McLaren have what looks to be the best car on the grid by quite some margin. But obviously, going into this weekend in China, one of the big talking points is a new FIA technical directive, which many kind of thought would potentially hurt McLaren in that. I need to look at my notes to make sure I get the wording correct, but effectively, the tolerance of movement of the rear wing has been reduced from 2 millimeters to 0.5 millimeters, with a 0.25 discrepancy for this weekend. In Japan, that discrepancy won't be in place, but effectively, McLaren have, of course, raised a few eyebrows with this so-called mini DRS, is what it's being referred to. And we saw, of course, via onboards in Australia that there did seem to be a bit of movement with McLaren's rear wing, it's fair to say. However, the question was put to Lando Norris, will this new technical directive hurt McLaren? Will changes need to be made? And, well, he's quite simply turned around and said, no, the car is absolutely fine and it's legal.
Yeah, can you imagine a zero point 0.5 millimeter tolerance, and they've got a little bit of, well, they've got 0.25 added
Yeah,
onto that for this weekend only, 0.75 of a millimeter tolerance. I mean, that's almost a static rear wing. It's like pretty much not
crazy.
moving if you think about it. But look, Lando's come out, been punchy himself, and said, it's not going to affect us, guys. We are absolutely fine. We know what happened in Singapore, of course,
Yeah.
when McLaren were caught using that mini DRS. They quickly changed it. There's been no real furore since then. Yes, there's been these talks about it, but for me, for Lando being so clear and concise on it and saying it's not going to affect us, guys, listening to his comments, I I take him at his word. In all honesty, Nick, I don't think it is going to affect McLaren, because why would you try and gain that little bit of advantage now when you know you've got the car to beat. And the reason why they've got the car to beat, and as we discussed on our videos over the weekend, and as our viewers and listeners have quite clearly been able to read into as well, the key for McLaren this year is what it's been doing, or well, that one Grand Prix in Australia is what it was able to do with its tyres over the course of that weekend. No rear heating, no rear overheating, sorry, in those rear tyres. That's the advantage that McLaren have got at the minute. That's what its rivals really have to try and get on top of, because if they do not, then the threat is, and as George Russell has pointed out in his media comments today, he fears McLaren could go on to win every single race. He believes the car is that dominant. That's a comment that's been shot down by Oscar Piastri in response when he was asked, saying, doesn't know what George is on about. He's been saying a lot of funny things lately, says Oscar about George. So he kind of thinks that George is not quite right about this one, that there's still so much to play for. And you got to think, it is really, Nick. We're only one race into 24.
One race.
One race, but
It's a
already
long year.
people are trying to read into that McLaren advantage. Of course, yes, it was 0.4 seconds over the course of that qualifying lap, which you have to say is quite a gap for the others to close up. We will get a better idea in China this weekend. The good thing is we know we've got good weather across the course of the weekend. No rains at the moment is a forecast that could threaten to disrupt proceedings. So we've got sprint qualifying and we've got normal qualifying. So 2 more qualifying sessions to give us a really good idea as to how good that McLaren is and whether there really is that considerable pace advantage over its rivals.
Just a quick message to our viewers who perhaps missed last weekend's videos from the Australian Grand Prix. The Australian Grand Prix marked the 10th anniversary of Racing News 365, and we are still running a prize giveaway to celebrate our 10th birthday. Should you want to be in with a chance of winning a scale model Formula 1 car of your favourite team or driver, all you've got to do to win the chance of winning is be subscribed to the RacingNews365.com YouTube channel and comment below any video, but just do this one for ease. I want to win. It is as simple as that. Something else, Ian, which was very simple, was Lewis Hamilton questioning why people were criticising his radio conversations with his race engineer, Riccardo Adami, in Melbourne. And of course, it sounded a little bit heated. It was, of course, their first race working together. Lewis is very much shut down any talks of tension and said, no, guys, it was simply the first race.
Yeah, same as Fred Vasseur. Fred Vasseur was asked the same thing post-race on Sunday in Melbourne, and Fred pretty much said the same thing. Well, of course, now Lewis has had his first real opportunity to address this because, a lot of us did refer to the fact that those messages between the pair of them seemed to be a little bit of a conflict. And, you got, as Lewis has rightly said in some respects, you do have to give them a bit of time. You've got to bear in mind that Lewis had such an outstanding relationship with Pete Bonington in Mercedes that, as I described it in one of my pieces over the weekend, those two guys were pretty much hand in glove. Such was the camaraderie, the friendship that they built. Lewis got a little bit punchy in his response, and he referred to the fact that, look, Max Verstappen has had a go at Jean-Pierre Lambiase on so many occasions, and you guys have never really talked about that. So why really should you have a go at us, referring to himself and Ricardo, when this is just simply race one? Well, we have actually written, just to counter Lewis's comment there, we have actually written, not myself, but many other outlets, of course, we have actually written about some of those punchy comments that Max Verstappen has come out with to Jean-Pierre. I mean, I know that Christian Horner has previously described Max and Jean-Pierre's relationship as that of being like an old married couple. Thought that was a great quote because they've been so long together now. But that's the way it gets. You learn to trust the race engineer you're with if you've been with them for such a long time. And of course, you're allowed to be responsive and have a pop if things aren't going well when you're inside the cockpit of the car racing around a circuit at 200 miles an hour trying to pull off overtaking moves and things aren't quite going right as to the way you feel that car should be going. So naturally your race engineer is this one outlet with whom you can let off some steam, and we know that's been the case with many driver race engineer relationships in the past. Look, let's give Lewis the benefit of the doubt. Let's listen to what he's saying on this occasion, and let's hope for his sake that that relationship with Ricardo Adame does build over a period of time, and it does therefore become something on which he's able, and on whom, of course, referring to Ricardo, he's able to rely.
For definite. And just quickly to end on rookie Isaac Hadjar, who of course crashed on the formation lap of the Australian Grand Prix and of course was seen seemingly crying in his helmet. But Helmut Marko came out at the time with some quite punchy quotes to German media saying that it was embarrassing to see Hadjar crying in his helmet. Well, those comments by Helmut have been addressed by Isaac himself today, and weirdly Isaac's kind of jumped to the defence of Helmut a little bit, and I don't think I was expecting that.
No, a little bit, but in fairness, you would have to admit, what's he
Yeah,
going to say in response to
very
the
good
man
point.
that hired him, but
Yeah,
also could fire him in the blink of
that's
an eye?
yeah, that's a good point.
So, but yes, he did say that. In fairness to Isaac, his very first words, he turned around and said, "I actually felt embarrassed myself."
Yeah,
So, give him a little bit of credit for that. But yes, he did say that there'd been a phone call between himself and Helmut. Post those comments as well, he referred to the fact that Helmut was interviewed in German and maybe it was lost in translation. I don't quite think so on this occasion, but we'll give Helmut and Isaac the benefit of the doubt. But in fairness, I did feel it slightly an uncomfortable comment, my personal opinion here, from Helmut, when everybody was coming out and being so supportive of Isaac. This was his first Grand Prix. He didn't even actually get to compete in that Grand Prix because it was the formation lap, on which of course he spun out and crashed. So he doesn't even have a race lap against his record yet, poor old Isaac. So you could understand he's a teenager as well. He's still young. Yeah, as we discussed, Nick, he might have reached Formula One so swiftly, but he's still a kid, bottom
yeah,
line. And he's wanting to prove himself so much. He wants to show what he can do to so many people. And he'd had such a good weekend prior to that, let's not forget. Yeah, he came within just a couple of tenths of getting a spot in the top 10 shootout in qualifying. So, he felt he'd let himself down then on that occasion. So this is the kind of kid he is, that coming so close to that Q3 position, and of course then to what happened in the race. If you add one thing on top of the other, then quite naturally there was going to be this outpouring of emotion that we saw inside, or saw via the TV cameras, him that taking place inside his helmet, of course. But I did feel that for Helmut to come out and say that, I thought that was a little unfair. Let's give Isaac a little bit of credit, a little bit of time, Helmut, before you come out and say something like that.
well, fingers crossed Isaac does make the start on Sunday. But of course, it is a sprint weekend, so we have two chances to make the start of some sort of race. But obviously, it is the first sprint weekend, something to keep an eye out for. For those who've been watching, thank you as always. Be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join Ian and myself on Friday post sprint qualifying. Yes, we have a sprint quality to discuss on Friday. See you later, guys.
And as always, take care, folks. And RIP, Eddie Jordan.